Two men posing as HOA inspectors went door to intimidating homeowners and robbing them blind until they knocked on the wrong house confident in their scam. They tried to push their way inside flashing fake badges and false authority, but what they didn't know, the man behind that door was a federal agent, and their little scheme was about to come crashing down in the worst way possible. You won't believe how justice was served. It started with a knock-knock. The kind of lazy, half-hearted tap get from a delivery guy or a kid selling fundraiser chocolates. No, this was different. 3 sharp, authoritative pounds against the front door, loud enough to rattle the windows, the kind of knock that wasn't asking, the kind that was demanding. Daniel Carter, standing in his kitchen, paused mid-sip of his coffee, his grip on the mug tightened. Just slightly too early for visitors, too early for anything really. His first instinct, a neighbor, maybe Mrs. Calloway from 2 doors down, coming to rant about his truck being too close to her mailbox again. Or maybe that one guy with the too perfect lawn, always looking for a reason to remind people of the proper community standards. Then came the voice. Homeowners Association inspection. Open up a Daniel's entire body. Stiffened. The words hit his ears. Wrong HOA. He didn't live in an HOA. That was the whole point. He had specifically bought this house outside of any HOA-controlled neighborhood. No petty fines for leaving his trash bin out an extra hour. No debates about what color he could paint his shutters. No clipboard warriors micromanaging his lawn. He liked his peace. And yet somehow these guys thought they had the authority to inspect his house. Immediately something was off. Setting his mug down with a quiet clink, he moved through the living room and approached the front door, careful not to cast a shadow through the sidelight window. Years of training had taught him one thing: observe before engaging. Peephole first. 2 men stood on the porch, identical uniforms, navy blue polos with HOA inspector embroidered across the chest in thick white stitching, khaki pants, badges clipped to their belts, except the badges looked wrong, cheap, too shiny, the kind of thing you order from a website that also sells prank diplomas and fake doctor notes. Daniel's eyes flicked between the 2. The tall one, blondie, stood with his arms crossed, mirrored sunglasses, hiding his eyes, too stiff, like he was playing a role he wasn't sure how to sell. The shorter one, mustache was stock here, his stance wide, chest puffed, aggressive, like he wanted someone to challenge him. Daniel didn't open the door. HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here. His voice was calm but firm. A pause, a shift. Blondie turned his head slightly toward mustache, like waiting for backup. Then his voice came smooth. Sir, this is a mandatory home inspection. We need to verify compliance with neighborhood safety regulations. Daniel almost laughed. Safety regulations? What regulations? Another pause. This time mustache stepped forward, lowering his voice like he thought a deeper tone would make him more convincing. Sir, you can either open the door or will be forced to enter by authority of the HOA Security Division. And there it was, the moment a petty scam turned into something dangerous. Most people would have panicked. They would have cracked the door, asked questions, maybe let these 2 frauds step 1 foot inside, just enough to make it easy, just enough for the situation to shift out of their control. But Daniel wasn't most people. He was a federal agent. And what they had just done, that was attempted illegal entry under false authority. He took a slow, measured breath. Voice steady. You got a warrant? Silence. Blondie's grip tightened on his crossed arms. Mustache blinked too many times in a row, then a scoff, a weak attempt at brushing off the question. Sir, we don't need a warrant under HOA bylaws. Daniel flipped the lock, and in one swift motion he swung the door open. The fake inspectors froze for the first time. Daniel got a clear look at them, and they got a very clear look at him. Not a clueless homeowner, not some retiree they could intimidate, but a federal agent, badge in his hand, gun on his hip, expression unamused. And just like that, they knew that they had picked the wrong house. For a second, neither of the imposters moved. The air between them hung thick, almost buzzing with the weight of realization they weren't dealing with some clueless homeowner. They weren't intimidating a retiree who might have been too afraid to question them. They had walked right into a federal agent's house, and now they were caught. Blonde's mirrored sunglasses didn't hide the fact that his eyes had gone wide. His jaw twitched, lips parting slightly, like his brain was trying to process too many possibilities at once. Talk their way out of it. Mustache, standing rigidly beside him, swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed, his fingers flexed at his sides, tension rippling through his forearms. Daniel saw it, that split-second panic, that flicker of fight or flight. They were trying to decide whether to double down on the lie or cut and run. Mustache was the first to recover, his hands lifted slightly, not all the way up, not surrendering, just hedging his bets. This is a misunderstanding, he said quickly, his voice carefully measured. We just conducting a safety check. Daniel stepped forward. His movements were slow, deliberate. Blondie instinctively took a step back, just a small one, but enough. His back bumped against the porch railing, cutting off any easy escape route. He wasn't in control anymore. Impersonating an official is a federal crime, right? Daniel's voice was even controlled. No yelling, no threats, just stated fact. Blondie licked his lips, his head tilted slightly. But he didn't answer right away. A stall tactic, a nervous tell. Sir, we're just where you get the badge. Daniel cut in Blondie's mouth, snapped shut, mustache shifted on his feet. There was too much hesitation, too much thinking. Daniel knew what that meant. Liars always overthink their next sentence. Blondie exhaled, sharply forcing out a weak, "Sir, we wrong," answered. Daniel didn't waste time. His hand went behind his back. The clink of metal, as he pulled out his handcuffs, was deafening in the quiet morning air, and that's when everything changed. The moment the cuffs came into view, Mustache moved hand to his waistband. Weapon. Daniel didn't hesitate. His gun was out and aimed before Mustache's fingers even touched the grip. "Don't." The word boomed. It wasn't a request, it wasn't a warning, it was a command. Mustache froze. His fingers twitched, barely brushing the handle of the gun. His shoulders tensed, his body locked in place like a spring wound too tight. Blondie, his hands flew up, palms out, no sudden movements. His breath was shaky, his composure cracking. Daniel didn't blink, didn't waver. His sight stayed locked on the shorter man. "Drop it." Silence. Mustache's fingers trembled. Daniel's tone didn't change. "I won't say it again." "Drop it." Another second. Then Mustache exhaled sharply through his nose and let go. The gun clattered onto the wooden porch. Daniel didn't move his aim, didn't relax. Blondie let out a loud, shaky breath, his hands still raised as if trying to distance himself from the sheer stupidity of his partner's decision. Now they understood this wasn't a bluff. This wasn't just some lucky homeowner who happened to catch them in the ACT. They weren't getting a slap on the wrist. They weren't walking away from this. They were going to prison. 15 minutes later, Daniel's front yard was a scene. Squad cars, flashing lights, officers moving with the kind of efficiency that said this wasn't their first time cuffing idiots who thought they were smarter than the law. Blondie and Mustache were no longer in control of anything. The fake confidence gone, the ACT shattered. Now they were just two guys in handcuffs, sputtering out excuses as offers pulled them toward the waiting patrol cars. "This is all a misunderstanding," Blondie insisted, his voice climbing with desperation. Mustache tried a different tactic, looking to one of the cops with wide, pleading eyes. "We didn't mean any harm." The officer shoved him into the back seat of a cruiser. "You tell that to the judge." And then, as if the humiliation wasn't enough, the truth came out, because these weren't just a couple of overzealous HOA weirdos who took their fake job too seriously. No, they were part of a scam operation, a month-long, carefully planned con designed to target vulnerable homeowners. They'd been breaking into houses under the guise of inspections, convincing people to let them inside, and robbing them blind. Jewelry, cash, electronics, anything easy to flip for a profit. By the time homeowners realized what had happened, these guys were already 3-zip codes away, pocketing their stolen cash and moving on to the next mark. And the worst part, they'd done this for months, dozens of homes, thousands of dollars in stolen property, always targeting people they assumed wouldn't put up a fight: the elderly, single moms, new homeowners too afraid to question officials. But today they hit the wrong house for the first time. They had knocked on a door expecting to con some unsuspecting victim, and instead they got a federal agent with a gun on his hip and a badge that actually meant something. A young officer, still holding his notepad, turned to Danny with an almost amused shake of his head. "You really lucked out." Daniel smirked, crossing his arms. "Oh no." He glanced toward the patrol car, where Blondie sat slumped against the seat, staring blankly ahead like his whole world had just collapsed. "They're the ones who got UNL lucky." 3 weeks later, Daniel sat in a courtroom, arms crossed, as the final chapter of this entire mess unfolded before him. The air in the room was thick, the kind of stillness that only comes when people know something important is about to happen. At the front of the courtroom, the judge, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses and a non-nonsense demeanor, flipped through the sentencing documents. The rustling of paper was the only sound in the room, besides the faint tapping of his gas against the bench for multiple felony counts, including fraud, breaking and entering, impersonating officials, and attempted assault. A pause. He let the words sink in. Blondie and Mustache sat at the defendant's table, their bodies tense, their expressions a far cry from the cocky arrogance they'd worn on Daniel's porch. Now they looked like exactly what they were: two men who had lost everything. Blonde's fingers were white and knuckled as he gripped the edge of the table, his mirrored sunglasses long gone, leaving his bare, darting eyes exposed for the first time. Mustache was worse, his shoulders hunched, his face locked in a grimace, like he was physically bracing for impact. Daniel watched them both, his face unreadable, but inside he felt nothing, no pity, no second guessing, just the simple, cold satisfaction of justice being served. The judge cleared his throat. 15 years, each. The words dropped into the courtroom like a hammer. For a second, just a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then the weight of it hit Blondie's breath, caught in his throat. His jaw twitched like his body was physically rejecting reality. His fingers flexed, gripping the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles turned a pale shade of gray mustache, let out a slow, shaky breath, his head drooping forward. He didn't argue, didn't fight. He just sat there staring down at the polished wood of the defense table, completely silent. Daniel had seen that look before. It was the look of a man realizing he had lost everything. No plea deal, no way out, 15 years, not a slap on the wrist, not AF in community service, 15 years in federal prison for a scam that had worked so well for months for dozens of homes, dozens of victims. They had walked in smiling, pretending to be something they weren't, pretending they had power. And it had worked until they picked the wrong house. The sound of the BFF's boots echoed against the marble floors as he moved toward them. Defendants will now be remanded into federal custody. Blondie turned to look at Mustache, his lips moving like he wanted to say something, but there was nothing to say. The cuffs clicked into place. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching as the two men were pulled to their feet, their futures officially over. And he didn't feel an ounce of regret, because these weren't just petty criminals. They weren't two guys who had made a bad decision or gotten caught up in something bigger than them. They were predators. They preyed on fear and trust. They dressed the part, played the role, used fake authority to push their way into people's homes. How many times had it worked? How many people had let them in without question, too scared to ask for credentials? How many had been robbed blind, never even realizing what was happening until it was too late? They had counted on that. They had relied on that fear, and it had worked over and over again. But then they knocked on his door, and the fact that they had chosen his house, that was just bad luck for them.